We're very honored to have with us Sylvia Burwell, who's the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, who knows two worlds intimately. She knows global philanthropy. After she left the Clinton administration, she worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and for the Walmart Foundation. And she knows government. We were just talking backstage. You were one of the few people that was in the Clinton administration for every day. So 8 years, lived to tell about it. Had 4 jobs there, including Deputy Chief of Staff to the President, where she traveled around the world with him, and Deputy Director of OMB, and she was also at Treasury. We were just talking about running, and while you were traveling with President Clinton, you accidentally ran a half marathon. Tell us how you do that.
Well, it was one of the trips, and then the trips, just trying to work in a bit of exercise was always a difficult thing, and I decided I would go out for a run. I'd gotten things to a point where I thought I could go out for a run, and we were in the countryside in England, and so it wasn't like it was marked paths, and so I ended up going out on some country road, and I got lost. And I kept looking at my watch because I knew I had to be back actually for a meeting.
The motorcade doesn't even wait for you.
No, the motorcade does not wait. And so I just had to keep running and running and running and trying to flag down cars to ask them which way I should go to get back to where I was going. So I ended up in the end, that's the longest I've ever run. And it was
probably the fastest too.
It was not an intentional distance. I like shorter distances, but yes, that is, when you have to get back to the meeting, and you're a little lost, that makes you just keep going, keep going.
All right, I guess we should get down to business. While we're talking here, please tweet us your questions at #WomenRule. Now, Director Burwell, at the very moment that we're talking, the president is talking over at the Center for American Progress. Mm-hmm. He's talking about 2 things: growing income inequality and shrinking economic mobility. What is economic mobility?
Economic mobility, I think maybe the best way to talk about economic mobility is maybe to even reflect on my own story, which is, I'm a second-generation immigrant. So all 4 of my grandparents came from Greece, 8th grade education for some, limited, and came to this country. And then I've had all the opportunities I've had. And so that mobility that this nation affords us, the fact that of our country. And you can do anything. You can be a CEO. You look at so many of our CEOs in this country and their backgrounds. And that's what that economic mobility is about. And that's stagnated. That has changed in our country. And it's changed over a number of decades. And it's a very serious issue for us as a nation. And that's why the president's highlighting it today. It's what keeps us strong. It's what keeps us innovative. It is what brings new and fresh blood and change and ideas. And it's a part of what is the strength of our nation economically and in other ways in terms of the ideas we generate. So the president today is going to spend time speaking about why that is happening, and looking forward to the things we can do, and growth in the economy is one of the most important things we can do, but growth that spreads throughout the economy. And so that's what the president will be speaking about today. He'll focus on issues like education is an important part of that, issues like minimum wage, issues like healthcare that afford people the opportunity to actually have productive lives. Many of the people without healthcare today are working people, raising families. And that constraint, and that's what the Affordable Care Act is about, that constraint holds them back and holds our economy back. And so that's what he'll talk about today.
Now, this seems a little bit like Charlie Brown and the football, but our congressional reporters tell us that there really is going to be a budget deal this time, that the House Budget Chairman Paul Ryan, the Senate Budget Chairman Patty Murray, who came back to D.C. a week early this week to work on it, are going to reach some sort of a small deal mid-month so that reporters and lawmakers and budget directors are not working on New Year's Eve again. So I have to ask you, have you been briefed on the Murray-Ryan conversations?
So right now, we're very excited to have a return to what might be called the beginnings of regular order, or the fact that the Congress actually works together to do the budget process. We submit a budget and then they act on it. And though it has happened in a different way to get to this point, we're excited and happy to be at this point, and certainly staying in close touch and being supportive of the process. Right now, I think what the administration can best do to help us get that ball over the line so we don't have another Charlie Brown situation is be supportive of the process and supportive of the effort that Ms. Murray and Mr. Ryan are doing, supportive of that effort, and being clear about the principles that we have so that everyone knows. And we've been clear about those throughout this entire conversation. So continuing to be clear and supporting the process. And that is what we're doing, and doing that by staying in touch as appropriate and as we have throughout the entire process, which began before I actually even came back to the Office of Management and Budget.
Now, the specifics are being worked out, but it's pretty clear the gist of this deal, and that is going to be to set some spending top line so you can have this regular order, to change some of the sequester cuts. Right now, they're all aimed at defense, to sort of move those around a little bit. And no big new taxes, no, which Democrats want, no big changes in entitlements, which Republicans want. Does that gist sound like something the president could accept?
So I think, speaking to what you can and can't accept, you need to see the specifics of anything before you know what you can and can't. We continue to stay in close touch, and the Democrats, I think, are pretty unified in terms of the things that are most important. And one of the most important things, which will be a framing concept of what it is you would accept, is we believe at this stage of the economic recovery, we're recovering. It's gaining steam. We're getting there. But what we want to do is have this agreement be a part of what can further support economic growth and job creation. And the way we believe that needs to happen is you need to replace sequester, which are cuts to what's called discretionary spending, and that's the spending that government does. It's infrastructure, it's education, it's National Institute of Health. Replace that with longer term issues. So we maintain deficit reduction in the long term, which we support fully because we believe that's important to economic health. But for right now, what we need now is a little more of that. And so that's one of the most important parameters, and we'll see what they come out with.
One of your more important priorities is a little more of
a replacement of the sequester, which is cuts that were just across the board. The sequester was a tool that was put in place. It was a threat. It was supposed to be a deterrent to being where we are. But the deterrent didn't work. And so now we're with a situation that both Republicans and Democrats believe is no way to govern, which is deep across-the-board cuts. And those cuts do things like 56,000 children were cut off of Head Start last year because of the sequester. On the military side, our readiness in terms of our Air Force and our troops practicing their flights so that they would be ready dropped to some of the lowest levels we've seen during the summer and early fall period. And those are the impacts when you do these across-the-board cuts versus longer-term focus things that will happen over an extended period of time that you prepare for. And those are things like cost, which is an important part of what is contributing to long-term deficits.
So how optimistic, I will say, are you optimistic about a budget deal?
I am optimistic. I've worked generally with people who are optimistic, whether that's, actually that's a phrase that's sometimes been used to describe Bill Gates. Is as an optimist. And I am optimistic. I'm optimistic that we can get there. And I would say I'm cautiously optimistic because having been in Washington, D.C. for 6 months now, I have seen things get close and then not happen. But I am cautiously optimistic.
And given the corrosive process and what we've seen since you've been in office, how could you be optimistic?
Because I believe that I believe that the substance of this is important, and I believe that fundamentally people believe we need to contribute to the economic growth. We need to focus on that. Job creation, our unemployment rate doesn't need to be where it is. That what I believe is actually when push comes to shove, that people are going to understand that the substance of this is quite important. And I hope that we're not going to, the other thing is I think there have been some lessons from what happened with the shutdown. and the fact that, yes, government does do things that people think are important, and that's not a way to run a railroad. And so I'm hopeful that what we're going to see is that people are going to come to an agreed upon solution, and one that there will be puts and takes. That's compromise. There will not be everything that we want in any solution.
Which side do you think learned more from the shutdown?
Well, I think we all, I'm not sure.
Or what was learned from the shutdown?
I think a couple things were learned from the shutdown. I think one is that one of the only positive things was that people actually discovered that the government actually does things that are important. Whether it's the economy or people not getting into NIH trials, people who have diseases not getting into those trials, or in 1 month, the Small Business Administration does $1 billion worth of loans and guarantees for small businesses. Many of those are women-owned businesses. And so just across the board, whether it was those things or how we take care of our troops' families if they pass, there's just thing after thing. And so I think that was a lesson and a positive thing when one tries to learn about it. I'm hopeful that people learned that that is not a way. And the idea that you were going to hold the government hostage, just the basic functioning of government hostage to another issue, is just something that I'm hopeful people have learned is a lesson that is not one they want to repeat.
Now, when you were president of the Walmart Foundation, you were living in Bentonville, Arkansas, and one of your initiatives was women's economic empowerment. What's the most important thing you accomplished?
I think the most important thing we accomplished was getting an initiative that had been announced, which had different elements to it, up and off the ground so that there will be a reality. So I was at Walmart, the Walmart Foundation, and at Walmart for a limited period of time, about 15 months. But during that period of time, we launched an effort, and Nell Merlino, who I think you all just heard from a little bit ago, was one of our outside advisors and a participant. And one of the biggest pieces that I'll highlight is sourcing from women-owned businesses. And so the company committed to sourcing $20 billion from women-owned businesses. And so that's a tremendous amount of business that will go to women-owned business, but putting in place the processes to get that done, and that's what Nell was on one of our advisory groups to help us do that, would be probably the biggest thing. And the other thing is we launched on the Walmart.com website, Empowering Women Together. And this is, you can go to the website and actually go to that part of the site and find products that are produced by women with some of their stories. And so it's great to have, those women have the access to two things that Walmart has to offer. One, it's customer base through Walmart.com. But the second thing is actually our buyers, because many of these women-owned businesses are small businesses, and the buyers at Walmart are generally very experienced in retail and will tell you, your dress of this, the colors that are going to be in this year are these colors. So come back to us with that. Let's get it on the site.
Now, in your other big philanthropic job at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you were the first CEO and you were president of the Global Development Fund. Mm-hmm. And there you learned a lot about Africa. And the playbook readers here will know that on the cover of Barron's this week, Paul Theroux has a very fascinating piece called Africa, Why Philanthropy Failed. And it's saying that some of the mistakes are being made that have been repeated since the 19th century. What works in Africa? What does there need to be more of and less of?
So I think certainly it is true that some of the efforts around aid and philanthropy have not all been successful. But in total, when you look at what has happened in terms of the questions of childhood mortality under 5 and those numbers from 1960 to now have been cut by 80% around the world. Even when you have a continent like Africa, and India in terms of where you have large concentrations of the poor. In terms of some of the things that I had the opportunity to see that are important, that are things that help make things work. First is how you approach what problem you're trying to solve. So when you're going to do giving, thinking through, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What is the solution space? What are the solutions? And then this third circle is, what would I be good at? So the Gates Foundation, as many of you know, sometimes focuses on research. There are governments that focus on delivery. But thinking through the intersection of those circles as you start what you're going to work on, because that helps you define how you measure success. The second thing that I would say is an important element of success is the idea of hearing from who you're serving. engaging, and that there's much in the piece that I probably don't agree with, but a piece that I do agree with that gets touched upon is the idea that you need to hear from, let's call it your customer, your client. And that's a part of how you get to the right solutions. Solutions where you're just saying, I worked on creating Toilet 2.0 because there are 2 billion people without proper sanitation, but us just determining what kind of sanitation people need without talking to them and understanding wasn't going to work. So understand and engage the people that you are working with. Then the third thing is always have your eye on sustainability and scale, the long-term game. So when you think about an effort that you're doing, if you want your effort to be limited, then that's fine. But if you're thinking about something that's going to spread, you should design it with the idea in mind of how will I scale this and how will it be sustained?
We're about to get the hook here because you do have a day job, so I'm going to ask you a personal question. That is, you adopted a child from Bhutan. My sister Bonnie and her husband Dave adopted a daughter from Ethiopia. They're adopting 3 more from Ethiopia later this month. What is your advice to someone, perhaps someone in this room, perhaps someone joining us on the live stream, who's thinking about adopting?
Well, first, get ready for a journey, because that is what it is. It is a journey, and understanding that it's a journey and making that part of the joy of the child, I think, is an important thing, because the journey will have twists and turns, and ours certainly did. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is make sure it's a process where you learn about yourself, because you do, and that's an important process. I think that learning about yourself you do in the adoption process and you do in the parenting process. And just go ahead and start it as part of that adoption process. And then the third thing I would say is read a lot, which we did, but then listen to your heart. So read and think analytically, but the truth of the matter is, in terms of your decisions and how you go, just go with your heart. You will have read and you will have internalized the substance, but go with your heart.
You're a member of the President's senior staff. You have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. How about some tips?
Well, there are a couple things that I have that are very good. I have a fabulous and wonderful husband, a concept that is very important. My husband is an attorney who, after my first maternity leave, stays at home now with the children. So that's a big help. The second thing is I have a terrific team at OMB. That's the other thing that I would just say is always an important part, is building great teams. And then the third thing is set your parameters. Everyone knows, that's one of the things that I did when I started this job, is said, it is a very high bar when you will not see me leave at the time that I will get home and have dinner with my children. I will work after, and I work after every night, and I work very early in the morning. But when you set your parameters and stick with them, that's the other part that I think helps make it work.
As we say goodbye, in your spare time, you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Would you do that again?
I don't know that I would do Kilimanjaro again. I would, I think if I were going to probably do something, I'd want to try Rainier, which is technical climbing, which would be different. So Kilimanjaro is not technical. You don't rope up and wear crampons. You just hike to a very high peak. But Rainier is a mountain that one of my colleagues, Sally Jewell, has done a number of times, where you actually have to rope up.
And you said you do the Billy Goat Trail.
Yes, my 6 and my 4-year-old, we go and hike in Great Falls and the Billy Goat Trail. And my husband's family, and we haven't quite gotten there, you are supposed to be able to hike your age. For my 6-year-old, that would be traumatic. So we're not there yet. But
wait, in miles?
Yes. Those
I'm still trying to shoot my age in golf. I didn't know about this whole hike thing.
Yeah. So we haven't gotten there, but enjoy hiking with the children.
All right. Well, thank all of you out in live stream who are watching. I thank my Politico colleagues who've worked so hard on this amazing Women Rule series. We thank Google and the Tory Burch Foundation for making it possible. Thank you all for being here early in the day. And Director Burwell, thanks for a fantastic conversation.
Happy to be here.